MinE at the Economic Association. And today we're going to have Roland Hodler speaking about ethnic clustering in schools and early career outcomes. Roland is an established scholar, and he has a range of work that goes through development economics, political economics, and a bunch of other applied topics. And in particular, he has a recent emphasis on ethnic diversity. So without further ado, Roland, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity to present our work here on ethnic clustering in Swiss schools. As was just said, my name is Roland Hodler, and I'm working quite a bit on ethnic segregation, but typically in a developing country context. So this work here now in Swiss schools, I've benefited a lot from my three co-authors who are all experts on the Swiss schools, on labor economics, economics of education, and sociology of education. So these are Caroline, Anatina, and Beatrix. Okay. What we do have in Switzerland is quite some migration. So Switzerland has been receiving migrants for quite a few years. And these migrants typically come in flows. So what we observe is that there are times with more migrants than times with less migrants. In particular, in each of these waves, we tend to have different types of migrants coming. So migrants with different ethnic backgrounds. As a result, we have quite a few different types of migrants in Switzerland. On this next slide, you see the four most common types of migrants we have in Switzerland. So people speaking a non-native language. So these are Albanian, Portuguese, Serbian and Croatian, and Turkish. And what you also see, there's quite some clustering. So these different groups, if you compare, for example, the Albanians and the Portuguese, they tend to cluster in different parts of Switzerland. And it's not only in different parts of Switzerland, but even within a canton or within a city, they might cluster in different places. That's kind of also important for our motivation. And the last fact that I think is important is this figure, which relates wages in different occupations to the share of Swiss working in this occupation and also gender. So to understand this, maybe focus on the white dots. So there should be 10 of them representing the different deciles of how many Swiss, or what's the share of Swiss working in those occupations. So where you have a 10, that means it's almost everybody, all females working in this occupation are Swiss. If it's a 1, that means very few of them. And what you see is a clear upward trend. So occupations that are where predominantly Swiss females work tend to get higher wages than those where you have fewer Swiss females working. And you find this more or less the same relation for males, but you also find a clear upward trend in the black dots. There's an outlier that the jobs that are almost exclusively done by Swiss tend not to have the highest wages. These are jobs, for example, in forestry, where very few foreigners go, but we still don't think of them as high-skilled jobs. So given this kind of pattern we observe, we are asking a couple of questions in this paper. The first is, how does ethnic clustering during compulsory schooling affect post-compulsory educational outcomes and also labor market outcomes? And we focus on students from ethnic minorities. And then we wonder, when we study peer effects, we wonder, does it matter whether you're just having different foreign language peers or whether it's actually peers speaking the same foreign language as you do? So for an Albanian student, does it matter whether he's exposed to many Albanian and Portuguese or whether he's only exposed to Albanian students? And then we are wondering, what are the channels in case we find that ethnic clustering does have an effect on educational labor market outcome among ethnic minority students. We contribute to different strands of the literature. Here you can see there are a lot of papers listed. I don't want to talk about all these papers. I just want to say that there's a general emphasis in the literature on the effect of foreign language speaking peers or non-native peers on the general population or on the native students in many of those papers. Instead, we focus on the foreign language speaking students. So what are the effects of having foreign language speaking peers on foreign language speaking students? And also, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, we look at the amplification, the potential amplification from having more students who speak the same foreign language. Then I think what we have compared to many papers is we're not looking directly at, say, test scores, but we're looking at post-compulsory educational choices and also labor market outcomes. So we kind of have a mid to long-term perspective rather than just a short-term perspective. And by this, we hope that we can contribute to bridging two literatures that are kind of sometimes seen as hard to reconcile. One emphasizing negative peer effects of non-native students, and the other one talking about improved labor market outcomes in ethnic enclaves. So ideally, we can kind of help to bridge this literature. And as a last point, we probably can help to understand, at least partially, the local foreign achievement gap, that often native students outperform foreign students quite a bit. And we argue that ethnic clustering could be part of this. Okay, so here is the outline of my presentation. I will give you some background information about the Swiss schooling system. Then I'll talk about the data, about the empirical strategy, results and conclusion. I guess more or less a straightforward outline for an applied paper. So here, this figure shows the Swiss schooling system. Before going through this figure, I would like to highlight two characteristics of the Swiss schooling system that are different from what you observe in many other countries. We have a relatively early tracking into different performance tracks, namely after 6 years of schooling. And what we have is a very high share of students doing a VET, so a vocational education and teaching program, rather than choosing an academic education at kind of the upper secondary level or post-compulsory level. So to give a little bit more detail, so at age 4, kids go to kindergarten. They stay there for 2 years. That's already compulsory. Then they have 6 years of compulsory primary schooling. And after 6 years, secondary schooling starts. They have different performance tracks, typically a lower and a higher track. And then after 9 years of schooling, compulsory phase is over. We have a larger doing these VT programs, as just mentioned. A somewhat smaller, but still relatively large share doing an academic education. So this would be something like high school, where you get the diploma necessary to go to university later on. So we call it Matura in Switzerland. And then there are a few students who do a bridge year. So that's not a gap year, but that's rather a year where you go to some other school that should prepare you or help you to find an apprenticeship position so that you can do a VT program. In some cases, also to enter academic education. And then you have a few kids who end up not going, who kind of just leave the system, who don't have any post-compulsory education.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So these boxes, the sizes are in proportion to like the relative population proportions?
I mean, yeah, approximately, yes. I mean, not in detail, but roughly, yes.
And those are quite stable over time, or?
The share of students going to academic education has increased over time quite a bit. It's now a quarter. Sorry, I will have the descriptives in a few slides. So I think it's not more than a quarter. It used to be more in the range of 10 to 15% earlier on. And this came at the expense of the VT program, which is still the largest, but used to be even larger. So the data we are basically having all the students in Swiss schools who were in grade 8, some went from 2011 to 2016. So this gives us more than 402,000 students who will mainly focus on the non-Swiss students, on those that do not speak, whose native language is not the local language. The main data source is called LAB. it is administrative data from Swiss school registers. We know about individual characteristics like age, gender, nationality, language. We know in which school they are, so basically in which school building they are, what their performance track is, in what class they are, and we don't know test scores. But we also know their post-compulsory education, whether they choose the academic track or a VT program. And if they choose a VT program, we know what type. So whether they are becoming a butcher or whatever their profession they are aiming to get at. And we also know the type. And in this case, the type is just 2 levels of difficulties that you have for most VT programs. Then we combine that data with Swiss labor force survey data, which has information about wages by occupation. And we can link VT programs to occupations, and thereby we can kind of have something like a predicted wage for the different VT programs. We do the same using an established data set on survey-based data on the prestige of different occupations to say something about the predicted prestige of VT programs. So going back to this same figure about the Swiss school system, so we basically are looking at are the peer effects in 8th grade, here in orange, and then the first set of outcomes are whether you end up in academic education, VT program, the bridge year, or you just drop out. And the second set of outcome is if you are in the admittedly self-selected set of VT programs, whether you choose the more difficult type or the easier type, what your predicted income is, and what the predicted prestige is. So here is large descriptive table. In columns 1 and 2, we just have data from all the students. In columns 3 and 4, we restricted to foreign language students, which will be those of main interest to us. And then in columns 5 and 6, the foreign language students are actually to the VT. So what you see is here that the share of foreign language speakers in Swiss schools is 1/4, so it's relatively high. And what you also see in panel B is that among the peer group, which is school track cohort, and I will talk on the next slide more what the school track cohort is. But the peer group is such that 26% of an average students are foreign language speakers. But if you are a foreign language speaker yourself, you tend to be in a school in which more than 40% of your peers are foreign language speakers. So clearly talking to ethnic clustering or ethnic segregation that we're having in the Swiss school system. Okay, we also have here some information on the career path. We see, so the exact number I wanted to give you before is 29% are choosing academic education. This is less on average. This is less so for foreign language students, and the vocational education training is still close to 50%. I think these were the main figures that I wanted to highlight. Okay. Now, the next slide is a bit messy, as I tried to pack everything of our empirical specification into one slide. So you see the regression equation on top. So basically, we look at school tracks, S, and cohorts T. So by a school track, I mean that's the interaction of a school, think of it as school building, and the performance track, whether you're lower or upper secondary education. So, and the cohort is a given year. So we think the relevant peer group is everybody in the same school building, and the same cohort was also in the same track. So the outcome variables, we have different ones, but these are always outcome variables of a particular student in a particular cohort, in a particular track, a particular school. But it's in the first year, we look at the outcomes in the first year of post-compulsory education. So basically the first year after compulsory education, but the explanatory variables, they are in grade 8, so 2 years earlier. And they are the share of foreign language speakers in your class and the share who actually speak the same foreign language as you do as a particular foreign language speaking student. So we do not take the simple shares, but we leave the kind of the so-called leave one out share. So we exclude the student under consideration and just look at the share of foreign language speakers among her or his peers. We have a set of individual control variables, gender, age, and dummy for the first language. So whether you're, say, an Albanian speaker or Portuguese speaker. We have a set of school track cohort controls. So which is average age, which is share of female peers, and the size of the school track cohort. And then we use school track fixed effects and cohort fixed effects. Accordingly, we cluster the standard errors at the school track level. So what we basically aim to do is to exploit variation in the ethnic compositions of cohorts over time within school tracks. So the same school building, always looking at high performing secondary students, we wonder if the size of foreign language speakers varies from one year to the next, whether this has an effect on the achievement of foreign language speaking students in these classes. Tim, you look confused or?
Roland, can you hear
yes.
me?
Yeah.
Giacomo De Luca. So,
hi, Giacomo.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
So maybe I should turn on my camera for a sec. So I was wondering, is it possibly the change in the composition in the class, would that potentially reflect the change in the social composition of the neighborhood to which that school belongs? One thing that comes to mind is, suppose a neighborhood is going worse over time, and the composition of the population in that area is characterized by again, poorer people, simply, right? Would that also automatically map into a student population in the local school which characterizes a higher share of foreign language speakers and potentially of the same language of the person you are considering, but instead of capturing in your outcomes the fact that there is a change in the peers, it may simply capture the change in the overall environment these kids are living in. I don't know whether my question is clear.
Yeah, your question is clear. So what we do have in Switzerland is indeed the fact that depending on where you live, your place of residency, you have to go to a particular school. Now, this is more of a problem at the primary school level, where there are many relatively small school buildings and therefore relatively small areas. At the secondary school level, it's often all the students from an entire village would end up in the same school building, just in the different performance tracks. In larger cities, there might still be more than one of these school districts, even at the secondary school level. So what we exploit is year-on-year variation over 5-year period or 6-year period. That is, we cannot. I think we cannot rule out that it has something to do with the entire neighborhood. But so if we think that we have a certain share of, say, Albanian students in one year, and this share drops a bit in the next year, goes up again in the next year. If it's this variation we exploit, these are clearly might be the variation of your relevant peers, but at the same time might not. I mean, what I try to say, I think that the neighborhood level sociodemographics might be more slow moving than the relatively short-term variation that we exploit. If that's true, then your concern shouldn't be too large. If that's untrue, then I think your concern is valid.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Okay, let me.
Sorry, Roland. I had a similar question, but you answered it. But also, can I? It just administratively, your voice started echoing a little bit at some point.
Okay.
Maybe you turned on a second mic or something like this.
Okay.
If you could just check.
I can.
But otherwise, we just proceed.
I don't have the second mic on. I should have. Make sure that I have my headset with me. Is it horrible?
No, no,
Then you can give me a
yeah,
few
we can
minutes
still
break, and I
we
look
can
for
still
my
all
notes.
understand. It just changed at some point. So, but I
Okay.
think it's okay. Yeah, unless somebody else disagrees. But yeah, we can understand. I think yeah, it's
Let
not
me
worth
know if
stopping.
it's
Fine.
worse. It might
Thank you.
have. It's a film. Okay. So we try. Sorry. We try to do some validation exercises. First, we show that there is enough variation in the share of foreign language speaker and the share of same foreign language speakers after netting out fixed effects. That's the case. Then we try to convince ourselves that there are no large and significant effects of share of foreign language speaker, the share of same foreign language speaker on individual baseline characteristics. We can do so very well for age and gender. It's a bit murky for socioeconomic status because we don't have any income variables. We do have parental education for 10% of the sample, and also there we do not find that parental education is systematically related to the share of foreign language speaking students. To us, this suggests absence of selection into these school track cohorts, which are our peer groups. There's a related concern that one might have about strategic redshirting to improve peer composition, so that parents who worry about their kids' education postpone entering school, kind of kindergarten or primary school of their kids. This is very difficult to do given the regulations in Switzerland. And also, it is not if you do so, you probably target primary school age, primary school level, and there you have different school districts than in than later on in secondary school. So we don't think it's a big issue. And also, I mean, typically there is quite some persistence in the socioeconomic status of a neighborhood. So if you really want to avoid your kid going into class with many foreigners, then you better move into another suburb. So nevertheless, even though we don't think it's a big concern, we do adopt a strategy by Black et al. Who show that, or who propose that we could instrument the peer composition with the predicted peer composition based on birthdays. And we find similar results when doing so. Sorry. Lastly, we look at variation in share of foreign language speaking students and the share of same foreign language speaking students, and we find that this variation is consistent with what is expected from random assignment. Okay, now to the results, looking at the different career path. So these three figures show basically the result of three regressions where the outcome is whether or not a foreign language speaking student is choosing academic education. So if we just have individual control, we do find a negative effect. We find the same negative effect more or less if we add cohort controls. And we do find, and in the third picture, we add also the share of same foreign language students. So we basically see that this coefficient is also at least as big as the coefficient on the share of foreign language speaking students. That is basically saying, if I'm an Albanian student and you add a Portuguese student to my class, then I can compute by how much worse or by how much lower my probability of entering academic education becomes. But if instead you add an Albanian student, then the negative effect is the sum of these two coefficients. So it's basically twice as large. So meaning having many foreign students in my class harms me as a foreign language speaking student, but even more so if they speak the same foreign language as I do. When we look at VT programs, we instead find that more foreign language speaking students increases the probability that foreign language speaker ends up in a VT program. We don't find a large effect for share of same foreign language speakers. And just for completeness,
Roland?
here, the bridge here. Yes.
Can I interrupt you a sec? I was wondering, is there any sort of threshold effects? I mean, in the literature on migration and integration of foreign students in local classes, the feeling I have, I mean, I'm not an expert in the topic, but the feeling I have is that there is the general, if you want, general message that as long as you have a few foreign language kids, this doesn't have a tremendously negative effect on the locals, and it has a very strong positive effect on the integrating kids. But then at some point, if you increase the share of foreign students, then you have the picture flips around in a way. Then it starts to have negative effects on the locals and the positive effects on the foreigner or the foreign background kids start being negligible in a way. So would you think that this applies also to your setting? So would you be able to test whether there is some sort of threshold that as long as the share of foreign students is below, I don't know, 10%, 5%, you find no negative effect, but then if it goes above some sort of threshold, then it's where you get, because in a way you're looking here at some sort of continuous variable, but this may mask some sort of threshold effects in there. So did you test, or would you think it's sensible to look at it?
I think it's intuitively appealing, and we looked at it kind of having nonlinear specifications and doing some semi-parametrics. We didn't find any clear pattern in our data. So I think the theoretical case for it is appealing, but we just couldn't confirm it. Yeah, maybe we should look at it again. But yeah. Okay, and then lastly, we do find, looking at non-post-secondary education, so at basically the dropouts, we find no effect of having more foreign language speaking students in general, but a positive effect from having more foreign language speaking students who speak the same foreign language as the individual under consideration. So basically, if we think about increasing, and I agree with Giacomo, we are just linearly increasing these shares. How do they, from where to where do they shift students? And basically, having more students speaking a foreign language moves them from academic education towards the VT, while it seems that having more who speak the same foreign language shifts them from academic education and the bridge here into dropouts. In a sense, some kind of normative judgment, it seems worse. Okay. Then, as a brief side remark, we look at the achievement gap in academic education. So what we see, if you focus on the left, on these two small tables on the left, what we find is that that an average local language speaking students has just 20% of foreign language student peers, while an average foreign language students speaking student has more than 40% of foreign language speaking peers. So there's again, this ethnic clustering or ethnic segregation that we have in the Swiss school system. And if you look at the academic education in the lower part of this table, we see that it's only slightly more than 20% of foreign language speaking students who choose academic education, but more than 30% of the local language speaking students. So we have kind of this achievement gap of 10%. Now, what we're wondering ourselves is whether this achievement gap in 10% is partly explained by these different school composition, by this ethnic segregation that we are observing. For that, we use kind of the point estimates on what's the negative effect of having more foreign language student peers on your chances of ending up in the academic track. We have already estimated this for the foreign language speaking students. We do the same for the local language speaking students. So we are estimating having more foreign language speaking peers. How does this affect, say, German speaking students' chance of getting into academic education? If we take all this together, we basically see that this achievement gap of 10% would be reduced. So, sorry, that 7 to 8% of this achievement gap is due to the ethnic segregation, according to our estimates. So, slightly less than 1/10 of it is explained by that. Obviously, there must be many other factors that contribute to this achievement gap, but ethnic clustering is also one of the factors contributing.
Roland, maybe you did this later, but is there like differences between the foreign languages?
There are some differences, and so we tend to find. So we didn't focus so much on the differences between different foreign languages, but in a set of results, which I don't have with me now, we look at the effect it has whether you are kind of the locally strongest foreign language, which is typically Albanian, Portuguese, or Serbian. And the effects tend to be worse if you are the locally predominant foreign language.
I guess I was maybe also a little bit interested in particular in Portuguese, because I guess Portuguese is still, like in a, it's a developed European economy. And maybe the immigrants are not necessarily the richer ones as opposed to those outside the EU, which I thought maybe are a little bit different.
Yeah, I'm sure there are differences. Like for Portuguese migrants, most of them are having relatively low socioeconomic status occupations in Switzerland. Most of them are kind of in low-skilled service sector, while I guess for some other, even European Union migrants, I think from Scandinavia, they would typically be kind of high socioeconomic status jobs that they're getting. The problem is we don't have really any large group of foreigners that are exclusively in these more fancy jobs. I mean, we have quite a few German migrants who kind of occupy a diverse set of jobs, while most migrants from Southern European countries are more kind of having low-skilled service sector or construction slash jobs. But you're probably right that we should explore this more. Okay. Is that fine, or would you?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
So next we look at projected labor market outcomes for this set of VT students. So what we find is, again, that having more foreign language speakers, especially speakers of the same foreign language, lowers the probability that you choose the more difficult VT program. As I said before, for most programs or say job profiles, you have two VTs. The more difficult one, which goes for 3 or 4 years, and the simple one, which only goes for 2 years. So having more same foreign language student peers makes you more likely to choose the less difficult one. Having more students, foreign language students in your class makes you more likely to choose VTs that are linked to low income later on. We don't find much of an effect on prestige. Let me just show you one heterogeneity table. So here we look at what we look as before on the share of foreign language speaking students. But if you look at the effect of the share of same foreign language speaking students, we disentangle between those that were born in Switzerland, those who entered Switzerland in the first 4 years of their life, that is pre-kindergarten, those who entered during primary school, and those who entered afterwards. And I would like you to focus on column 2, which shows the results for VET. What we find there is that the share of same foreign language students in your class that the effect becomes increasingly negative the more recent your arrival is. So suggesting that it doesn't harm you that much, or even not at all, if you're born in Switzerland or arrived really early in your life in Switzerland, the effect is not that negative of having many students who speak the same foreign language as you do. But if you arrive late, then it has a strong negative effect. We think that this could have different explanations. This could be related to the importance of networks for finding an apprenticeship position. So you need to find basically an employer who's willing to hire you as an apprentice. Or it could be related to language acquisition, that your German-speaking skills are really poor. We find kind of a similar pattern with effects that become stronger in columns 3 and 4. In column 1, you have a slightly different picture, but there that there are very few students who actually enter academic education, even though they arrive in Switzerland relatively late. So there are many of these cells are basically almost empty. This might explain these strange results. But given the story I told you about the VTs, I would like to focus on two channels, networks and language acquisition. Was there a question or? Okay.
So maybe I have one.
Okay.
So you mentioned now channels or mechanism now. I am curious to see what you think these effects are due to, in the sense that, well, you know, the language acquisition slowdown is potentially an effect if when the number of foreign language students increase, they increase at least in part due to someone moving in to Switzerland from another country lately, or with respect, you know, and maybe it shouldn't happen if that person was already living in Switzerland, but moving from one neighborhood to another. So it would be important to kind of distinguish, I guess, no?
Okay, thanks, Massimo. So the variation that we exploit is variation within the same school building times performance track over years. So this could just be related to when kids were born. It could also be related to in migration. With the exception of those heterogeneity results, we haven't really made use of the date of in-migration as much as you probably would like us to do. But maybe I tell you about our channels and then you tell me what is still missing. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Roland, can I also jump in with a question?
Sure.
So I was wondering, does the distance of the, say, mother or native language and the language of the canton in which they move to matters? Because I guess, again, in some cases, you would expect that the distance is not so big, and so it's going to be easier to kind of integrate in the new language than in other couple of languages or pair of languages. And this may matter even more when you are older. I mean, if you enter your 12 and you have to learn German, good luck with that. And I can imagine that, well, that already tells some of that in a way. I mean, people already settle in places where it makes sense, probably. At least the Portuguese map would suggest that.
That's what I was about to say. So right. We see that Portuguese people predominantly settle in French-speaking cantons, and exactly because the language distance is quite small. If you start from Albanian, Serbian, and Turkish, the language distance is relatively large, no matter what you learn. We haven't properly exploited that. There is a forthcoming paper in the American Economic Review Insights by another Swiss author who actually looks into that matter and finds. So the outcome there is a labor market success, and he finds if you speak French or a language that's close to French, you have much higher chance of being successful if you enter the French-speaking part and German-speaking part. So, but we haven't really exploited that.
Right. I mean, I don't know whether you have the power to do that, but I can imagine if I'm 12, it's going to be so difficult to throw a joke in a language that's too far away from mine. So that pushes me towards the peers of my language more than if the distance was lower.
Yeah, again, I don't have any. Aren't funny people anyway, so it's will not work. So no, it's probably true. Yeah, I think these are already the four largest migrant populations that you see here. And there's really only one of them is connected to one Swiss language. So I'm not sure we have enough variation there, but we should definitely try. Thanks for that.
Right.
Okay, so One of the channels we thought could be important is maybe it's about role models. There's a lecture on that, or maybe it's about network effects. If you select into VTs, in particular because you need, as I said before, you need an employer who is willing to hire you. So if you're well connected already, that makes it easier. So what we want to focus on is on what we call foreign language typical VTs. So we define them as VT programs that are more likely to be chosen by foreign language speakers than by native speakers. So whether having a larger set of peers that are foreign language speakers makes you more likely to choose these foreign language typical VTs, maybe that would point towards the network of already known people who are employed there or who are employers in these jobs, that this might be important. The other one, and here I again cite a couple of papers, and the last one, Schmidt, is the one that I just mentioned on Swiss labor market and French speakers, is on the importance of language acquisition. And there we can use some semi-official data. So we use language requirements of different VT programs. So the industry associations, they do say what they think students who go into their particular VT programs, what skill mix they should have. And there's a webpage where they do that, and they use data, or they provide this information in relation to the standardized test that is taken in all of Switzerland, which is called Stellwerk 8. And this basically lists your skills on a scale from 200 to 800. So if you look at the, according to this data, the lowest German requirement in the German-speaking part is if you want to be an agricultural trainee of the less difficult type. And the highest German requirement is if you want to become an information and documentation specialist. So we want to use that to see whether having more foreign language speaking peers pushes you towards programs that have lower requirements in German. We think we can use a nice placebo. We can, because this requirements are also available for math, so math skills should not be affected that strongly by your peers as your language acquisition. This one is just briefly, it's supposed to show that these two things are really not twice the same, that the German skills by foreign language typical VTs, that they are more or less the same for foreign language typical and foreign language non-typical VTs. So this is independent variation. And here are now the results that we have on these channels. In the first two columns, for the first column, you see that the share of foreign language speakers in your class does not really increase the probability that you choose a foreign language typical VET. And if you look in column 2 on same foreign language typical VTs, so VTs that are chosen by predominantly or disproportionately by people of your own language group, there the effect, if you add these two coefficients, is very small, close to 0, so it does not have a strong effect either. So this lets us kind of shy away from the network interpretation. In column 3, we look at the importance of math skills, and the share of foreign language speaking peers, or share of peers who speak the same foreign language, does not really affect the importance of math in the VT programs that you choose. But in column 4, you see that having many peers who speak the same foreign language as you do has a very strong effect of making you less likely to choose VT programs that has a high language requirements, local language requirements, basically. So this lets us conclude that it's probably a lot about language acquisition, why having peers who speak the same foreign language are harmful to your educational outcomes. Okay, to conclude, we find that a higher share of foreign language speaking peers increases the probability of getting into vocational training rather than academic education. This effect is amplified for an increasing shares of peers speaking the same foreign language, and these effects are mainly driven by language acquisition. So we find general that ethnic clustering in school harms foreign language speakers and is partly responsible for the local foreign achievement gap in post-compulsory education. So why many fewer foreign language speaking students end up in the academic track. We do think we have a couple of policy implications. First is these results and the ethnic segregation in schools partly represents the residential segregation that we have in Switzerland. And I see this as one of many negative side effects of this residential segregation. We don't really know how we want to reduce it. I'm not even sure whether the median voter, who is Swiss, local language speaking, actually has a strong incentive to reduce it. But if we cannot reduce it, then maybe another policy implication could be to weaken the link between the place of residence and the school you go to. In the US, they talk about busing. I'm not sure whether that's the best solution, but weakening this link might be promising. And if not, then at the very least, think about language classes for foreign language speaking students, especially those who are in classes where almost all are speaking foreign languages. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. And if there's time and you have questions, I'm ready to answer.
Roland, I would have another question.
Sure.
So going back to what I was saying before, again, I would find it compelling if you were able to find, to use again this distance, and not only just the distance between your original language or your native language and what you're moving to, but also you could exploit the fact that some countries where these migrants come from have in their schooling system some foreign language that may potentially be one of the languages in Switzerland. I mean, typical example, I spent some time of my life in Germany, and I remember that all the Bulgarian that I met in Germany could speak German way better than many other people, just to say. And it boils to the fact that, you know, in the Bulgarian system, German is one of the language, the second language that is typically learned at school. So in a way, this information is available and it could be exploited. So Croatians moving to Switzerland may already know German or much more German than Albanians. And with this in mind, you could really test whether it is the ones that come to the place without any previous knowledge of the local language that are the ones where you find the gap, or if you want, the negative effect more pronounced. I mean, I don't have a clear test in mind, but you could use this information somehow to tease out the mechanism in an even more compelling fashion.
Yeah, okay. I think this is an excellent comment. We haven't even thought about this yet, so we should consider this. Thanks.
Right. No worries.
Thank you, Roland, and thank you, everyone. And any remaining questions? Almost exactly on time. Okay, so before everybody leaves, I just wanted to make two announcements. So one is that we are recording all these sessions, and they will be available on our website, and probably the exact link is going to go out to the mailing list soon. And so not just today's presentation, but all the mini virtual sessions that we're holding. And second, and probably more important, like it's a small group of participants we have today. But last week we sent out a solicitation to fill in a EEA and VFS survey. And so we're trying to create a climate report that is modeled after the AEA climate survey. It's a small group, but like every count matters. So please do disseminate this among your network and your groups. And hopefully we can kind of raise the response rate. And if you haven't actually, if this is news to you, please let me know so we will make more efforts to try to push information on the survey out. So thank you everyone for coming. And then we're also going to have our last scheduled session for this semester in February 7th on Wednesday. It's going to be a student from Queen Mary, Laura Perez. And hope I'll see you again. See all of you again there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for all the comments.